Sunday night, guys. Here's the question. Why aren't you watching the Super Bowl? That's what I want to know. Christy told me, she goes, why are you doing the live on Sunday night? It's Super Bowl Sunday. And I'm like, oh, it is? So I'm going to have to go to admit it. I have no idea who's playing. So don't judge me. It's just whatever. So tonight we're going to talk about suspensions, but I got to make sure everything's working here. I moved everything around. That's just typical me to move stuff around. So the question is, so why is watching both? Great. So you guys can hear me, so apparently, because you heard my comment about Super Bowl. So hopefully I'll make this as good as the halftime show. I don't know. Tonight we're going to talk about suspensions, which is one of my favorite things. Let me adjust this one just a little bit. Chiefs and Buccaneers. Okay, that doesn't help me at all. All right, I'm with Malcolm. Malcolm says he's a sports dude, so I am with Malcolm on that. So let me flip this over just a little bit so I have this all right, guys. Here we go. All right, there we go. All right, so I put Malcolm on the screen. So for those of you guys that are watching me on Instagram, of course, we're broadcasting on Facebook, and the video's a little better on Facebook, and so is the audio. So it's probably echoing like crazy, making your ears want to bleed on Instagram. But tonight we're going to talk about suspensions. But before I get into suspensions, I want to do a couple shout outs. So the first thing is the new hat. Like the hat. I like the hat. Thank you, Y. So, yeah, Y says he likes the hat, so love that. A friend of mine was in Charleston, South Carolina, and he texted me a picture where he had the hat on, and it was him and his son, which his son is just, it's amazing. His son's like 13 years old and 6'4" and almost 300 pounds, and he's huge. But anyway, and he says, what color do you want? So then he shipped me a hat, so thank you, Ryan. So that's awesome. Really appreciate it. So, you know, I just like hats. And then the next one is Mark sent me some DVDs of the Avengers. I don't know how many of you guys have watched the Avengers. So I ordered a DVD player. Boy, that's just because I got to watch them. Because I tried to find it on Netflix, and they're not on Netflix, so that's what I did. So anyway, all right, so tonight is suspensions. Before I get into suspensions, check out the store. Check out the Helderburg store. We've got a lot of cool stuff. For example, clocks. So I got some more clocks in, of course, on the Helderburg store. And we have, when you go to the website, there's a 15% off coupon, so you can save some money on the clocks. And pretty cool. But you know what's pretty funny about these? These are made out of the body panels of the Land Rover. But you can see this one was originally, what was it? I can't even tell you what a color it was originally, but it was a repaint. And this one was originally Keswick green, or the Heritage green, and they repainted their Land Rover, and therefore we got the body panels, and we did the laser etch into it and made them into clocks. So there you go, clocks. All right, cool. So that, and then of course, and I know a number of you, I finally got these back in. So we got our aluminum mugs back in, or whatever you want to call them, tumblers. That's what they're called, tumblers. So those are back in. And then we have new hats that are due to arrive any day. So we're restocked on that. So that'll be going out pretty quick. All right, so tonight, suspensions, which is, I'll tell you what, if you've never driven a Defender, suspension is something you definitely want to invest in, something that you want to understand, something that you definitely want to replace. But, you know, ask your questions as we go through this. But suspension-wise, when you're driving a Land Rover, let me just give you a visual of what it's like when you're driving a stock Land Rover where the suspension hasn't been redone. In other words, if it's an original Defender suspension. So you're driving, you take your eye off the road, you're talking to the wife, you're talking to the husband, whatever, you're talking to somebody, and you look back and you're going here because just you know, there's so much play in that wheel that you're constantly having to do your corrections on it. So that's the first thing about the suspension and the steering of a Defender. The second thing about a Defender is you're going around a corner. Let's say you're on an on-ramp or an off-ramp, and when you go around that corner, I mean, it's like your whole body's leaning with the truck as the truck leans. It looks really weird when you're behind a Defender. and they're going around the, going up an up ramp or whatever, where it's the S turn, because the whole thing's leaning, and it's an awkward feeling, but you get used to it, I guess, is what I've been told by a number of people, but I just couldn't deal with it. Also, too, the suspension just is really stiff. It's truck-like. It's like, and you're like, when you're hitting the bumps, if you're in a bad road, is what it feels like. So I'm going to tell you how to correct that tonight. I'm going to tell you some of the things that you can do. And have you guys ever driven a vehicle like that the suspension is just, it's just like, it's just, and then another thing about Defenders and Land Rovers is when you hit the bumps, you hear metal hitting metal. You hear, and you're like, whoa, what's falling apart? But that's normal. That's just normal. And what that noise is it's the coil spring that's actually in the tower, and it's hitting the tower. So if you're hitting a lot of bump, the spring is coming up and down, and hitting that tower, and it just resonates through that aluminum body, and it makes your teeth hurt. It really does. So you're probably wondering, well, why do you like Defenders, Paul? Because it's all easy to correct that. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Before I get into that, I want to show you something pretty cool that I got. So I have a big box of these. So I talked about this on Instagram. I talked about it a little bit on Facebook, so hopefully you can see it well. But this thing has got some heft to it, and it's the new style key with the Helderburg. There you go. My Instagram peeps and my Facebook peeps. So you probably can't see it. It's blown out with the lights. But it's got the H engraved in it right here. And so if you look at it, I know some of you guys have already seen this on the social sites where I talk about it, but can you tell what it is? Can you tell what it was modeled after? So what this is, the windows, the white one here, the windows on top. Everybody know what those windows are called? What are the windows called on top, guys? Let me see if I got my comments over here popping in. I need to make sure. All right, what are the windows called on top? Who can tell me that? The windows on the top of a Land Rover Defender. What are those windows called? All right, I'll give you guys a minute to guess about that for a minute, okay? Or Google it. But anyway, so here's the windows on the roof, and then here's the slant of the front roof, and that's what it does, is it slants down in the front. If you look, you see how it slants down on the white one behind me. But that's what it's modeled after, and this has got some serious heft. Really cool. So anyway. There you go. All right. So, all right, we did get some guesses. No, the windows on top. Instagram got it right. Only some of you. They're called Alpine windows. So the windows on the top, sides, and the back are called Alpine windows, is what they're called. Here's your Alpine windows. That's what that is, okay? So there you go. All right, so some cool stuff on that. All right, moving in. Let's talk about suspension. The first thing, thank you, Bob. Bob got it right. So let's just share that so everybody can lock that into the memory notes so Facebook guys can see that now. The first thing that you can do to a Land Rover Defender to fix your suspension, which is, it's easy in the back, but it's not easy in the front. And that's anti-sway bars, also called anti-roll bars. So the sway bars, if you look at the pictures, if you go to Helderburg's website and you look at any of the trucks, the low angle shots, you'll see on all of my trucks that I build, you'll see the yellow bar underneath that runs from one side to the other. That's an anti-sway bar. Some Defenders came with an anti-sway bar, but only in the rear, not in the front. And then the sway bar that they had on the Defenders was a kind of a thinner diameter anti-sway bar, so it had the chance to give more flex. So one of the things that we do on the upgrades is we go with a heavier duty anti-sway bar, much thicker, and some of these guys still guessing sunroof, moonroof. No, it's the Alpine windows we were talking about. So, and by the way, it's not called a sunroof or a moonroof on a Land Rover Defender. You must be very proper It's called a shooter's hatch for this sunroof. That's a shooter's hatch, okay? Anyway, squirrel. All right. So anti-sway bars in the rear, thicker diameter. That's the first thing that you can do for your Defender to beef up that suspension. I shouldn't even use the word beef, just scratch that word beef. To make the suspension not have that sway when you're going around doing a turn or a corner or an S-ramp or something like that. You don't get the body roll. That's what it does, is it helps prevent that body roll. But you also should do that in the front, and that's what we do. Again, if you look at the pictures on Helderburg and you look at the various all of the Defender builds, you'll notice that I automatically do, as a base build, anti-sway bars, because my goal is to make it very drivable, make it comfortable, and make it safe. And I'm not saying that it's not safe with the anti-sway bars, it just doesn't handle as well. So anti-sway bars in the front and the rear. But here's the problem with the front anti-sway bar problem. Did that make sense? That was kind of like a Peter Pan picked whatever. But anyway, you know what I mean. All right, so in the front, there's no brackets. There's nothing on the frame for you to be able to attach these front sway bars. So that proves to be a little difficult. It's not difficult. It's not like it's hard, but you have to fabricate some brackets because they're not there. So you fabricate these brackets, or you find brackets off of another vehicle, cut them off and weld them on. So putting the anti-sway bars on is a tremendous, tremendous improvement. Just don't go with the original ones. Because later on, Land Rover Defender, they started doing anti-sway bars in the front and rear. But when we're talking about a 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, I don't think they started doing these bars until 2007, I believe, is when the first year that they did these bars. So anti-sway bars, you can get them at Rimmer Brothers, you can get them at Bearmock. Bearmock is probably the largest in the world, and they're in UK, as is Rimmer Brothers. But those are two of the places you can get these anti-sway bars. But when you get the anti-sway bars, I've seen so many people that would take my recommendation to do the anti-sway bars, and then what they do is they cheap out. And what I mean by they cheap out on the bushings. Because you can put the best bars on there, but if you put cheap bushings on it, now you're really defeating the purpose. So you would do some nice polyurethane bushings, put them in place that are a little more firmer. Don't get the real soft ones. If you read the description and talk about it's really soft, you want the ones that are more for off-road, on-road. I believe they are yellow. I think they're yellow, depending on who manufactured them. But anyway, get the nicer bushings. Whatever the price, if you see the $50 bushings and then you see the $100 bushings, buy the $100 bushings. It does make a difference. So that's the first thing you can do for a suspension is anti-sway bars and good bushings. The next thing, let's move over to shocks. And I was going to show you, there we go. I'm not even, guys, if you're on Instagram and it's pausing and everything else because it's losing connection, just go over to Facebook, okay? Because we have no problems at Facebook, all right? So, okay, so anti-sway bars, good bushings. That's your first step. That's what I would do before I did anything else, unless, of course, if you pushed on the vehicle and it just kind of bounced around and you heard the shock shaking and all that stuff. So now let's move into shocks, and I'm going to give you good, better, best is what I'm going to talk about in shocks. So again, good, better, best, starting with let's just say good is Terra Firm. T-E-R-R-A-F-I-R-M, Terra Firm. They are good shocks. They really are. There's another type that's called Old Man Emu shocks. They're okay. I mean, they're fine. I just prefer the Terra Firm if I'm going to cheap out on my shocks. And I don't mean cheap out on the shocks because Terra Firm are really good shocks. So Terra Firm, they have the, what is it called? Heavy duty shocks, which are good shocks. They last a long time and they give you a really good ride. So with the Terra Firm shocks, the only problem that I see with Terra Firm is if you're in a really wet climate, they seem to get kind of spotted up and get a little bit of corrosion on the outside, just a little bit of surface rust, not a big deal. If you just keep them kind of wiped off, they'll stay pretty and you don't have to worry about it. So Terra Firm is good shocks. Better shocks, now this is kind of a tricky one when I get into the better shocks. Better shocks would be Fox, F-O-X, and we've all heard Fox, but Fox shocks are really good shocks. Now I'm talking about road right now. I'm not talking about off-road. When we get into off-road, things are going to change up a little bit. So on-road, Fox is a better shock. It works really well. And you have a couple different options here too. You have the Fox with the dual reservoirs, which is really for the off-road, not for the on-road. The dual reservoir keeps the shock cooler, so if you're really using it a lot and everything, it just keeps it cooler, because that's where a shock starts to fail you, is when it gets too hot, it's not doing the dampening that it needs to do. So Fox is a really, really good shock. And then the best, to move to the best, which is really a marginal best when it comes to the ride performance, but it is it's a difference in price. And you guys have got any idea what shock I'm going to say? Because you'll see it on a lot of my trucks. So this one here, Maxim, has Fox shocks, and I'll elaborate on that. Hey Rod, over here, the Havana Gold double cab sitting right there has Bilstein. And then Montecchino Red, Bilstein, and then in the back, Enzo, Fox. So again, we're talking road. So Bilstein makes a really good shock. And so let me kind of spin this just a little different though to explain Bilstein versus Bilstein. So what we've done with the Bilstein shocks is we work directly with the manufacturer, and we have Bilstein shocks that are specifically valved. In other words, they have the right fluid, the right valve. Everything is set up specific for whether it's a D90 or a D110 or a D130, because that's what's important. If you have a shock that is basically not valved, it's valve too stiff, then it kind of defeats the purpose. And that's where you get too much, that rattling of your teeth. So they're valved specifically. So there you go. Good, better, best. Tear firm, great shock. Better, Fox. Best, Bilstein. That's for the road. So now that we talked about shocks for the road, shocks for off-road, if you're going to do more of the mix, let's say that it's going to be 40% off-road and 60% road, then things start to change up a little bit. Bilstein is a good shock for off-road also. Don't get me wrong, they're a good shock, but you have to go to the dual reservoir for that. So Bilstein is up here in the best on off-road also, but then there's a different type of shock system that you can set up that's called a rose jointed shock. So shock, not sock, boy, rose jointed shock. And a rose jointed shock, well, that's what they do on the race cars, but what the difference is, it doesn't have any bushings. It's metal hitting metal, and eventually it can shear the bolt off, but it helps on the suspension. So for example, like the Spectre Defender, the one that's really built for off-road, or the Bowler Bulldog, they have rose jointed shocks. So read about it. Rose, like the flower, R-O-S-E. So anyway, so that's what that is. But then Fox makes an excellent shock for off-road. Now you have the option of doing a dual reservoir for off-road. So a dual reservoir Bilstein, dual reservoir Fox. But if you're not doing a tremendous amount of off-road, like if you're running fast and really using the shock, then the dual reservoir can honestly be just a little bit of waste of money. So you could do just fine with the Fox shock. That's, I believe it's a Fox shock 2.0, Fox Race or something, but I think it's a 2.0 is their newest one. So Fox and Bilstein are pretty equal. And then you go right into, guess what? TerraFirm. And TerraFirm makes a really good shock, but when you get into the Fox and the Bilstein, those two are pretty comparable. And the TerraFirm is kind of down here just a little bit, but it's a really good shock. Those are the three different types of shocks that I would recommend for off-road or on-road. So now that we talked about all that, we talked about our anti-sway bars, we talked about bushings on the anti-sway bars, we talked about shocks for the road and the off-road. So I'm gonna stop right there. Do you guys have any questions? Any questions, any thoughts, anything that I didn't cover yet? Because there's still more about suspension to make it right. So I'll give you guys a minute to kind of think about that if you have anything, because basically that was just an excuse. So anyway, I was actually going to show you guys some shocks, and the next thing I'm going to talk about springs, but my storage building is covered in snow. It's like blocked. Okay. So Robert just asked about Old Man Emu. Old Man Emu is a type of shock. And I said that a few minutes ago too. Old Man Emu makes a good shock. They really do. It's a good shock. It's been around for a long time. And when I'm doing shocks, I just generally would, I go to the, like I said, Terra Firm. So Terra Firm and Old Man Emu, they're pretty comparable. So, and just to give you an answer, that's where I say I go Terra Firm, because that's the way I went. I tried Old Man Emu years ago, and it was all right. It was great. And I think maybe what it was is the Terra Firm marketing just got me. Their logo looks pretty cool, even though Old Man Emu sounds cool. But they're a good shock too. But I've definitely seen some Defenders where people have cheaped out on the shocks, and they went to AutoZone and just bought whatever it was, and or Walmart or wherever it was. So you definitely don't want to do that. You want to make sure that the shock is specifically set up for that vehicle. In other words, it's the right thing. So Carl asked, he said, which would you recommend for a lifted application? Lifted application is going to be either your Fox or your Bilstein shocks, in my opinion, for a good shock. Terra Firm has them for lifted also, which are, again, good shocks. It's just Fox and Bilstein are better shocks. And so talking about suspension, let me move into lift, which is a good segue. Thank you, Carl. Lifting a Land Rover Defender, you can lift a Defender about 2 inches before you start having to do anything extensive, meaning, you know, heavy duty propeller shafts, radius arms, and those type of things. So 2 inches is about where I would say kind of stop. But if you do raise it, let's say 2 inches, even though you don't have to update because you have front radius arms, the radius arms, what they are, and you'll see them if you look under the truck, it's actually looks like it's a metal rod, not really a rod, but you know, a big chunk of steel that's hooked to the actual, you know, where you see the axle that's coming across. It's hooked to it, it's bolted to it, it has bushings, and it comes back, and then it's got one single long bolt there's a fitting up under the truck that it goes into. Those are called radius arms. They're in the front, and then there's some in the back. But if you do lift it, even 2 inches, go ahead and spend the extra money and go ahead and get some different radius arms. Don't cheap out on the radius arms though. I mean, because there's some that look really cool. It's got all the drilled holes in them and everything else. There's a chance, I mean, if you're off-roading, that is. If it's purely for looks, it doesn't make a difference. Or if you're doing a little light off-roading, it doesn't make a difference. Get the one that, you know, tickles your fancy the most. But if you do lift it, again, if it's 2 inches, you don't have to replace the radius arms, but you could, why not? It's like $700-800. Because what the radius arm does is if you visualize the differential in the front, you know, that big hump in the center, if you visualize that, and then the entire housing that runs across, that's where your wheels are on. So there's a drive shaft that goes into the back of it. So imagine here it is. This is the axle, and here's the drive shaft. So when you lift the truck up, you're automatically twisting this because it's been lifted, and your radius arm that's hooked to it is not really long enough. So it's just twisting it ever so slightly, and then your drive shaft that's running to the transfer case is in a little bit of a bind. So it can start to wear that out after time. Same thing in the rear too. The rear one's a little smaller. So lifting, I would recommend, why not, go ahead and do the radius arms. You would, for a 2-inch lift, 2 to 3 inch lift, you would do a 3-degree radius arm. And I wouldn't recommend lifting it any more than 2 to 3 inches. I mean, that's plenty. It really is plenty, unless you're a guy that's out in Moab or whatever and doing serious off-roading. But if you're doing serious off-roading, you know, don't need to listen to me. You know what you're doing. So anyway, since we're done with that. All right. So let's move into the next point. You know where I told you guys that when you're driving down the road and the spring is hitting the actual, you know, the housing where it is, and it's metal hitting metal, and it's creating all that noise that actually makes your teeth hurt. So what I was talking about there, and something that is not done, but you'll see it on all of my trucks, and it's really kind of weird that you would think people would do it. It's really done, but a lot of the builders don't do this. And what I'm talking about is called coil isolators. So coil isolators, and they're easy to get and they're inexpensive. They're like $5. Easy to get for a D90 is where it is. But the coil isolator, $5 for a D90, easy to get. But here's the problem. They don't make them for a 110 in the rear or a 130. So if you're doing a restoration to a 110, you might as well forget trying to get a coil isolator because they're not made. They don't sell them. So we said, you know what, we got to do something to fix that problem, basically. And Land Rover started using the coil isolators later on in the Discovery, but they never used them in the Defenders. So we would actually get them from Discovery. But trying to get it as a part, forget it, because they're just not out there anymore. So we work with Gavin, and Gavin makes these coil isolators for us. So this is polyurethane is what it is. So it's a polyurethane, really thick, heavy duty. And so this sits on top of the spring, and this creates, really what it does is it does lift it up just a little bit, but it creates that isolation from the spring and from the housing, which does help your suspension because it's not metal against metal. You get rid of that tinny sound inside the cabin, but it also makes the ride a little more plush, a little nicer. So that's what happens there, is coil spring isolators. If you have a D90, it's easy. If you have a D110, forget it, you're not gonna get them. And but these are just all made for us, and I don't even know what kind of machine he uses, but he's got a mold and everything else, and so we buy these by the box load. So anyway, so coil spring isolators is what that is, which moves me right into coil springs. So let's talk about coil springs, because that's important. So keep in mind, last week I told you guys about how the series truck, which was prior to the Defender, used leaf springs, which are just flat pieces of metal. They're stacked, like, 3 of them are stacked up, and they got these little shackles that hold, and it's just this, it looks like it's an old logging, like a wagon basically, which is also on the Santana. And that's a dead giveaway. If you're looking at thinking you're getting a Land Rover Defender, look at the suspension. And if you see that leaf spring under there, the flat metal, it's not a Defender, it's a Santana. So, springs. So you'll notice, if you've seen the videos, if not, check out Instagram, you see the videos of Maxim. Maxim, as you know, is lifted. Enzo is lifted. So what I do with the springs is I use a spring that's Stagecoach. Thank you, Malcolm. That's what it's called, Stagecoach. But I use a different type of spring. So Hayrod, which is the double cab D110, go look at it on the website and you'll see how the ride is. It's a little lower. So the coil springs that I use on this one does not have what's called a progressive spring, and nor does Enzo, because it's been lifted. So I lift the truck with the springs. That's how I get the lift, and then I put the radius arms on there. The shocks are specifically for a lifted truck. So these springs are not lifted. The ride is a little more harsh. Same thing in Enzo. The ride is a little more harsh than what it is in A-Rod or the Montecino Red or Elizabeth, because all of those trucks have what's called a progressive spring. So let me kind of clarify that again. Non-progressive spring, and these two trucks that are lifted. Progressive in the ones that I'm using that are daily drivers, basically. So a progressive spring, what it is the progressive spring really is the way it's sprung. In other words, the way it's actually twisted and turned, and it has the pressure on it. It's a firm ride when you're driving down the road, so it's keeping the wheels on the the tires on the actual pavement and everything else, keeping the tires on the ground. There you go. Whew, boy. Keeping the tires on the ground, so you're keeping contact with the ground all the time, which is a safe driving experience. But when you start hitting bumps, it's springing at the right rate. But then what it will do is if you're on a really bumpy road, the spring, based on how it's manufactured, will give you the spring that you need, the easier ride, so it smooths that ride up. So again, the difference is progressive springs, non-progressive. If you're using your Defender for primarily driving, if let's say that 80%, 70%, 90% is on road and you want a nice ride that doesn't spill your coffee and doesn't rattle your teeth, invest in progressive springs. The ones that I use are by a company called Eibach, or Elbach, E-I-B-A-C-H is what it is. I believe that's how it's spelled. They've been around for a long, long time. But anyway, the springs that I'm doing are specifically, again, here's another thing. The springs are specifically sprung, created, manufactured for the truck that I'm building. So we buy those by the truckload because we're having all of those springs made specifically for the truck. So if it's a D90, it's specifically for that D90, the weight of that truck. If it's a D110, it's for the D1, it's specifically for that truck. I hope that makes sense. So it's a custom spring for a custom ride is what it is. So that's springs. So progressive or non-progressive. Another thing about springs, if you look at Herod and if you look at the Montecino Red, they've both been lowered. I lowered them by about 1 inch. And you probably wouldn't have known that unless you've seen it sitting by another. For example, when it, the pictures when you see Herod sitting by the double cab, sitting by, let's say, an Aaron, which is the orange soft top, you'll see that the orange soft top is a little higher because it's stock height. Herod's been dropped by 1 inch. And that 1 inch lower makes a tremendous difference. So when you're driving this truck with the Bilstein shocks, the anti-sway bars, the coil suppressors, everything on it, the thing handles like a dream. I mean, it's almost like driving a Volvo. I mean, it just drives extremely well. It handles well. You turn, it goes. So anyway, so the point is you lower it by 1 inch, you give up a little bit of that cool factor because we all like stuff bigger and taller. But what will happen is it will give you a much better ride by lowering it 1 inch. It's mind-blowing how much of a difference of a ride this is versus one that's stock height. But again, progressive springs is the answer to be able to get that smooth ride. So now let's move into the next part. Well, actually, you know what? It's that time. So I haven't shown you guys. So it's just Instagram. You're not going to get the same effect, guys. But Facebook, you are. All right, so there we're back. So here we go. Just for you guys, the Facebook guys, the Instagram guys don't get the same. You guys don't get the same effect. My little graphic and all that. All right, so before I get into I'll answer that, Steve, in just a second. So my gear of the week is, I got another camera, but I'll show that to you next week. But then, of course, there we go. Not a new design. It's been around for a while, and this is called the Spyderco Paramilitary 3. And I got it in black. I'm just waiting for the new scales to come in. I'm going to put copper scales. I've got a thing for copper. I know, it's amazing. Do I have my copper pin right there? No, I don't. So anyway, I'm waiting for the copper scales to come in, but I've been using it. It's a nice little knife. I think it's a little pricey for what it is. I mean, because as you guys know, where is it? All right, I really like the Savini's. So Savini's, inexpensive knife, nice knife. I mean, they're just inexpensive and they're great knives. Spyderco, great name. I think you're paying for the name. I really do. Where's it says it's made? Not that it really makes a difference where it's made. Golden, Colorado, USA Earth. I wonder if it's really made there. I don't know. But anyway, all black, kind of cool. So anyway, there we go. All right, Steve had a question. Steve said, let's see what Steve said. You know, it's like when you get to that age and that you don't want to wear glasses and you're like, I'm not going to wear glasses. I don't really need them. And I try that often. In fact, I tried that just a little while ago when I was moving the camera gear around, and I'm like, I can't see. All right. So anyway, I just have to fess up to it. And I've tried contacts, but I just can't seem to do it. All right. So Steve said, can you talk about the factory ride versus all of the changes you made? Factory ride is... it's not very good. It's not. Factory ride does give you that body roll, because what I'm talking about, the Land Rover Defender and the ride that it's giving you is from the factory, and it has body roll from the factory. I will also tell you from the factory, things just don't work. Buddy of mine, he just bought, it's a pristine, perfect D110, and it's from South Africa, and it has the BMW 2.8i motor in it, which is super rare. And I'm going to get into the tires and everything in a minute. But anyway, so buddy of mine bought the D110 right-hand drive BMW motor 2.8i, which is the same motor that they put into the 535 series and I believe the 735 series too. So the thing goes really well, but it was like it was sealed in a vault and not used, and he got it. So it has very little miles and the dash lights don't work. So anyway, so my point is, factory ride on a Land Rover Defender. These things were built as a farm truck. They didn't really think, oh, people are going to be driving these and, you know, thousands of miles and exploring and all that. They thought people were going to put their sheep in the back and haul the sheep to, you know, slaughter. That's really what they thought. And at least I believe that's what they thought. So the ride is not very good in an original Land Rover Defender. In fact, the ride is not very good in an original Land Rover Discovery, to be honest. It's very truck-like. So anyway, so making all these changes makes it where it can be a comfortable, it really is comfortable, that you can drive down the road, you don't feel beat up, you don't feel tired. Because if you have something that's like doing all this and everything and you go somewhere, by the time you get there, you're just tired. You're just wore out. So that's a big difference. All right, so the next part of the suspension that I definitely got to mention that we can't forget, and 7 o'clock, okay, is wheels and tires. So let me clarify something, because a lot of times I'll have people go, oh, what wheels are on there? And I'll say they're the Sawtooth or the Bead Locker or whatever. What size wheels? So there's a difference. Wheels are the metal. That is the steel or the alloy part. That's not a tire. So I know some of you guys are going, Paul, I know this, but it's just important. And I'm not being facetious. I'm not being a smart aleck. I'm just wanting to clarify. Wheels, rims, that's the metal that's in the center. Tires is the rubber. I know everybody knew that. So anyway, so if you want a better ride, a ride that's going to give you a daily driver ride, look at Hayrod, the D110 double cab. What it has is an alloy wheel. Alloy, the lighter the wheel, the better. Because if it's a heavy wheel, that's more sprung weight. That's weight that's traveling that will take away from the ride. So the lighter the wheel, the better. If it's an alloy wheel, the better, because alloy actually does have a little bit of spring to it, versus steel has no give. Alloy can spring a little bit, not bend. Steel, if it springs, it's bent. So that's the first point. The size of the wheel makes a difference. The bigger the wheel, it means the smaller the actual, the height of the tire. So for example, on Hayrod, that's an 18-inch wheel, and then on Montecino Red is a 16-inch alloy wheel. So if you want a really good daily driver, go with an 18-inch wheel, And you know what? The difference is marginal. I'm just telling you what's supposed on that. I can't really tell that much of a difference between a 16 and 18. And I'll tell you in a minute why. But anyway, so supposedly 18-inch wheel means the tire you will have on it will have less sidewall. It will be a shorter tire, meaning that if it's a shorter tire, that less sidewall means it has less give. Because if the rubber is taller, then you got more sidewall. That means when you're going down the road and you jerk it, that there could be the sidewalls not as strong as an alloy wheel or a steel wheel, and it will give. That makes it not as stable feeling. So for example, you look at a sports car where they want it to handle really well, then guess what? They got a 20-inch wheel or 21. And the tires go smaller because overall you want the actual tire, the tire and the wheel, the height to be the same, whether you go with a 16-inch wheel or an 18-inch wheel. And that confuses people a lot of times. I'm like, oh, let's do an 18-inch wheel. And they're like, well, I want to do the bigger one. I want to do the 16, so they get all confused, or vice versa. I forget how it is. But anyway, where they get confused. So anyway, 18-inch wheel, and then the tire with less sidewall is going to give you a better daily driver ride, is what is happening. But when you're using Bfgoodrich KO2 tires like we do, those sidewalls are pretty stiff. If you've ever watched the tire shop put those things on, you see that machine, it takes some grunt to get that tire, to get that sidewall to pop over that wheel, that rim. So that's what's supposed to be going on. But now moving into tires, on A-Rod, the double cab and Montalcino is Bfgoodrich KO2s. Those are good tires. Those are good tires. They're an all-terrain tire, not a straight-out mud tire. The next one up that's a mud tire is called Bfgoodrich Km3, which is less of a ride, comfortable. I mean, it's not as comfortable. It's noisier. It actually doesn't do as well in all the different mixed conditions. And then, of course, on this one, on Maxim and on Enzo, we have the Maxxis Trepador tires, which are 100% off-road tires. But I'm still driving mine on the road and everything else. And what's interesting with Maxxis tires, when you first put them on, for about the first 400 or 500 miles, you'll get that wheel wobble a little bit. It just at certain speeds. And I've taken it in, I've had it aligned, I've had the tires balanced, I've done it when I first started driving it. And then after about 500 miles, it just went away. So I think the tires started to wear in is what happened. So anyway, so there you go. Wheels and tires makes a huge difference. And but to recap, anti-sway bars, front and rear. Don't go with the OEM ones. Go with the heavier duty ones. Get the good bushings. The next part is shocks. Depending on how good do you want the ride. Fox shocks are great. Bilstein are better. Terra Firm are fine. Springs, go with progressive springs. If you're going to be driving on the road a lot and you want it to be a daily driver, you're going to pay more for those progressive springs. Make sure that you figure out the coil spring isolators, because you want to get those in. They make a tremendous difference. And then moving into what else did I've talked about? Shocks, I talked about springs, anti-sway bars, and then good wheels and tires. So that's really about it in suspension. So what do you guys got for me? What kind of questions do you have? Since I know if something's going on with the Super Bowl, you're not paying attention to me right now. I know that. So anyway, oh, look at that. New keychains. I got more keychains coming in. It's really blowing out here on Facebook. Let me see. There we go. It's not so bad now on Facebook. Ooh. This is actually a body panel is what it is. And it says, custom made from genuine Burma Bright Land Rover body panels. Helderburg key fobs. So anyway, I got a bunch of these on the way. So, brakes. All right, brakes. Steering dampeners. Oh, that's a good one. I didn't think about the steering dampener. That's a good one. You see, I was really prepared. I always fly by the seat of my pants. All right, so let's talk about steering dampeners, which is very important. I can't believe I missed that. Sorry. So steering dampener, which you can't really see. Well, you can on Instagram, guys. Right there. Look down really low. Yeah, you can see it on Facebook, guys. So right here, you see a little bit of yellow right in there. That's a Bilstein steering dampener. So steering dampener, what it is like a shock that goes across the front. And what it does is it helps that bump steer, more or less, that when you hit a bump, so your wheel doesn't go, is what it does. So steering dampener, I can't believe I forgot that. Yes, steering dampener is something that you definitely want to change and get a good one. Go with the Bilstein or go with the Fox. So on this one, we have the Bilstein, which is, yep, Bilstein on this one. Hayrod has Bilstein, Montalcino has Bilstein, but the D130 actually has a double shock by Fox. So it's got a shock, but then it has a spring. So we went all out on that. So that's what will help your suspension. Another thing, you know, that I didn't even think about mentioning too is go replace all your tie rod ends. New tie rod ends, all new bushings. I'm glad you mentioned that, by the way, Bob. It just made me think of everything else. So if you're redoing your suspension, do it all. New tie rod ends, go ahead and do, you know, the pan head arms, I mean, everything. All new bushings, get the good bushings, and it will make a tremendous difference in the way it rides. So there you go, steering dampeners. Steve asked about brakes. So brakes really not for the suspension, but brakes are cool. We have our new brake system now, which are actually billet aluminum that are really big, and they're a 6-piston brake, so they will stop you really fast, and with cross-drilled rotors. So I have my standard braking system, which is 4 pistons, and it's 4-wheel, it's disc all the way around. But 4 piston, they stop you nice. But the newer ones really stop you. So I will have the new ones on Enzo here pretty soon. I'll probably put them on Hayrod too. So anyway, so there's that. All right, Fox with air suspension. No air suspensions for me, guys. No thanks. My Range Rover has air suspension and it's new. Let me see what else. Can you buy a regular Range Rover and get a feel for the car before you invest? Okay, sorry. All right, so what somebody's asking is, can you buy a regular Range Rover and get a feel for the car before you invest in one of these bad boys? No, not really. The way a Range Rover drives is completely different than how a Defender drives. Range Rover was actually designed for the rich farmer, and a Defender was designed for the everyday farmer. And they don't really, they're not comparable in the way they drive. So they're not. One is very luxurious, it's a luxury car, and the other one is much more of a, how would you put it? How would you put it, guys? For those of you that have driven the Defenders. It's more truck-like. So driving a Defender is much like driving a Jeep, except it feels more planted, or driving a G-Wagon is what it's a lot like. All right, so here's another question. So Facebook guys, ask questions if you like. What size tire do you think looks best on 16-inch wheels? It depends on the look that you're going for, really. And I mean, and that's what when I'm building one of the trucks, I'm saying, all right, who's going to drive this, and how would they dress, and what is the look that we're going for? So on my double cab, which again, take a look at the pictures, I wanted to do a cross between a classic, I mean, because they're super rare, and I think I'm taking the roll bars out of the back, I believe, and the step-up bars on the side. Take some pictures of it, and you guys tell me what you think. But I'm going to pull the step-up bars off because I don't need them. I mean, I've lowered it enough that I can, even, you know, me being shorter, I can get in and out of it with no problem. So I don't need the step-up bars, and I think it takes away from the looks of it. So again, 16-inch or 18-inch, it depends on the look you're going for. Enzo has a 16-inch wheel, but it's got really big tires. I'm running 35-inch tires on that. Same thing on Maxim, I'm running 35-inch tires on that. I started to go to 37s, but it makes it to where it's not that much fun to drive when you're driving on the road. So anyway, so there you go. So yeah, Defender, think about it as a Jeep or a G-Wagon. That would be my best explanation for you. Range Rover is much like a, you know, an Escalade or whatever. The Range Rover is a little sloppy going around the corners a little bit because it's trying to make it so plush, so soft. And the Defender, with the suspension upgrades I'm talking about, handles much better going around corners and on the road. So, all right, guys, do you have any questions? If not, I am going to go in and spend some time with my beautiful bride, and I'm going to see if I can talk her into making a margarita for me. Yeah, I think I'm becoming an alcoholic anymore. Only on fruity, girly drinks, though, okay? So anyway. All right. Going once, going twice. Go check out the store. 15% off coupon is going off. It's coming down. Go get your clock. Go get your tumbler. Go order your hat. And we'll go from there. But anyway, guys, I'll talk to you soon. I'll do some videos. And preferred disc brake manufacturer, my brakes. So yeah. I don't really know, David, to be honest. We just order the stuff. Lens. Yeah, there's a couple of lenses back there. There's a 300, 500, and all that. But anyway, this is one of these is the ones I prefer to use. So anyway, so it's like show and tell around here, guys. So I love my Leicas. So anyway, I'm trying to sort all my camera gear. I have too much camera gear. No, I never no such thing as too much. But anyway, all right, I got to go eat dinner. So with that said, thank you. I'm going to kill Facebook. Have a wonderful night. And if you're whatever team you're sporting for, I hope they win. So, all right.